All right. Thank you for joining me and all that to talk about your book.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we definitely weren't just talking casually before this introduction. So, for starters, let's just like introduce the book. And actually, before we even get there, let's talk about where you were before you even began writing the book, and that Jerry Maguire moment where you started writing it, where things started to come to formulate into kind of a cohesive project, and how that all came together.
Um, well, the the book itself, I think, took about 2.5 years before the final version came together and I was ready to publish it. Um, I have a notebook actually that is like the first draft, and um, like half of it didn't even make it in to the book, but like it was just me like scribbling like a bunch of stuff and like writing like there would be a transition here to this one um and that's usually how I start off like any book is I just take a notebook and I'm like this is specifically for the next book that I'm working on. And half of it was stuff that like I had already written because of the topic being almost like a story, like the personal storyline of over like 5 years of my
Mm-hmm.
life. Um, Half of it was already written. It was just a matter of placing it in. And then as like the years went by, as I was working on it, more poems that I had written over those years ended up making it in because they ended up being part of like the recovery and the progression and everything. Um, and I think the last poem that I wrote that made it into the book was the I swear this isn't a suicide note, but I'm also a liar, which is at the end. It's like second to last poem. And I think when I wrote that was when I knew, like I put it in at the end there, and I knew I was like, okay, this is like this book's done now, and it's ready to go.
And then you're like, one more.
Yeah, and it's like, whoa. Well, that was part of the editing process, and that was more
Mm-hmm.
so like I wanted to end on a lighter note because I was in such a better place. And
Mm-hmm.
the I swear this isn't a suicide note is like it's not as serious as I feel like people take it, even though I want them to take it seriously. Um, but I was like, I need to put something in there at the end to show, you know what I mean? Like that I'm actually
Yeah,
in a way better spot than when like the story started.
for sure. And on that note, how much responsibility or pressure do you feel when writing these very heavy poems? Because you have readers that you consider yourself a mental health advocate, and you write about these heavy themes. How much pressure is there to handle these in a way that's both real to life and also responsible creatively?
Um, I think the pressure comes more so on performing and
Mm-hmm.
finding venues to perform at because I I love a mixture of atmosphere. I love performing at like punk bars and I love performing at little cafes. But I really hate when like I look into something and somebody's like, "Yeah, like we're really stoked to have you, but like we need your work to be censored."
Mm-hmm.
And for me, and it's less about like anarchy, you know what I mean? Like, I should be able to say cuss words if I want to, and more so
Yeah.
like it's part of the heavy topic. And like, if I'm going to be an advocate for this, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to censor myself. I shouldn't have to because there is such a rawness that comes with like the struggle with mental illness and with abuse also, which is what half of the Electra Complex is about. Like they like we shouldn't have to send like the people who have the voice for that, who are putting themselves out there for stuff like that, we shouldn't have to censor ourselves. Which is why I also don't do a whole lot of family events.
So you don't perform at your family gatherings.
No. um, but and on another hand too, with like you said, like the responsibility and like the reality of it, I feel the need because of that also on social media to put more of my personal stuff out there because I've taken that stance and it's like if my work is going to speak for that, if I'm going to be an advocate for this stuff, then I need to be able to post stuff out there for other people to read, to know that like they're not alone with certain things, which is a really, really, really hard thing to do. I mean, we had the Me Too movement, which was awesome. I was so happy about that because like it gave so many people a chance to speak up who felt like they, couldn't.
Hmm.
And it was a really awesome time period. And all of these people currently now that we're seeing in the news that are going down for like, the tapping into a very serious subject, but like the sex trafficking like circles, and all of that, like that's awesome too. And I think it's giving people more empowerment, to speak up about these things, which is also giving me more motivation to speak more about these things because I
Hmm.
want people to have that empowerment. So there's definitely, I wouldn't say there's so much pressure as much as I definitely feel a responsibility for it though, for sure.
That's interesting because not that I was trying to ask a loaded question, but I feel like it almost begs an answer more like the opposite of what you said, whereas it seems like you're going more like you have more of a responsibility to keep it real, to be as specific and explicit as possible without being exploitative, because it's a harsh reality and therefore it's something you don't see every day that we should be confronted with.
Right. And as a poet, I support poets like of
Hmm.
all genres, of all kinds. But I mean, like you have like those Instagram, like I call them fluff poets. It's like three lines, and it's like, oh, the flower bloomed even though it was raining, like stuff like that. And it's like, good, yes,
Is that
like
a real
right, like
one?
right. I'm happy for you, but at the same time, it's like the point of being a writer. I feel like any writers who made it big, who are famous for stuff, is because they were so blunt and they were so raw. And I actually had someone come up to me in my last show in Philly at Wooden Shoe, and he came up to me and he was like, "Please don't take this the wrong way, but your one poem made me very uncomfortable." And I was like, "Good." Like that's what I want to make people feel uncomfortable. Like if I'm not offending you, if I'm not making you think about things that you don't usually think about, you know what I mean? Then I'm not doing my job right.
Yeah,
And I don't like some I've had people at venues actually stand up and walk out when I've performed. And it's
I
like
think
I
I might have been one
understand.
of them. I had to get the parking meter, but sorry, I had to interject there.
No, but like I understand too with sensitive topics sometimes people have to walk away.
Hmm.
But like also like if I like the meme, for example, of like the Karens. You know what
Oh
I
yeah,
mean? Like if I was performing a poetry thing and like there's a Karen there and she's like, "Oh God, this is just like trash. Why would they let her say that?" And she walks out. It's like then you weren't the person to be here for it anyway. You know
yeah.
what I mean? But like my work, like that's what I want it to do. I want it to make you think. I want some like lines to really hit you and maybe offend you, but not necessarily in like an offensive, like, oh God, like that was rude, like offensive, but like
Hmm.
offend you in a way like I don't want to think about that, but I probably should think about that.
Hmm.
Like, run away from a lot. Humanity runs away from a lot now. Like, I blame technology and social media for that. Um, so I think trying to bring people back into the reality of a lot of stuff can kind of be like a really harsh hit,
So would
if
you
that
say
makes sense.
that being the person in control and being the performer in front of an audience, how do you describe the power dynamic there between, so you're on stage addressing these very vulnerable subjects, um, or would you say that you're uncomfortable ever, or would you say it's actually the opposite, where there's a bit of power there because you're the one controlling the narrative? You know what I mean?
It definitely switches. It definitely goes
Mm-hmm.
back and forth. Um, and it's what is the word I'm looking for? You can't prepare for it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like I never know what performance I'm gonna go up there and start reading and actually feel like empowered and powerful
Yeah.
versus like when I go up there and all of a sudden reading a poem that I have done, like, you know what I mean, a bunch of times hits me again, you know, and I start feeling like super vulnerable. Um, so it's I kind of tap like before I perform. Like I was a performer my whole life. I was a dancer for 17 years. I did
Mm-hmm.
musicals, like acting classes in high school and stuff. So I kind of try before a show to tap in to kind of like almost like that acting performer type role to try and
Mm-hmm.
distance myself a little bit. But I mean, like, you can't always do that because, like, this is my work. These are my words. These are my experiences. So sometimes that barrier of performance definitely breaks. And, like, I mean, I've definitely have started crying performing before. I've definitely
Mm-hmm.
had to not finish, like, a poem before in the middle of a set. I had one set where I actually ended up having, like, an internal anxiety attack during
Mm-hmm.
and I blacked out for half of the set. Apparently, I finished it and it went well, according to everybody in the audience.
Yeah.
but like as soon as like it ended, I just remember like stepping off the stage and immediately like walking outside and like having to like you know start like breathing heavier and like bringing myself back into reality and like it's scary because you never know when something like that is going to happen and as like I continue to put more and more work out there get more and more noticed you know what I mean and like starting to do more shows like outside of like my little town and stuff it worries me you know because it's like I'm starting to perform for more and more people starting to get out there and it's like what if I get up and something like that happens
Yeah.
you know but then again on like the other side of the coin it makes it more real.
Yeah. That's true.
So,
Um, but you have a bit of a support network at your shows typically, right? Like it seems like you've got a bit of a family of different performers. People either travel with you, tour with you, or just other performers that you've built a relationship with.
yeah, definitely for like stuff in my hometown, and like closer venues. Like Philly is not far from where I live, in York. It's like hour and like 40 minutes depending on
Mm-hmm.
traffic. So, it was a lot easier to like have friends like of musicians and stuff to do like a full lineup you know of like half poetry half like music and stuff I knew other poets in Philly unfortunately the poet who was supposed to open for a show in Philly couldn't due to an emergency that happened like the night before.
I was wondering about that. I'm not going to bring it up on here, but I was pretty worried about that situation. I'd heard about it.
She's doing well
That's good.
she's good so um she was like, if I can, I'm still gonna make it. And we were like, no, you just stay home. You need to worry about your own health. Um, oh, and just so like everybody knows, it wasn't the coronavirus.
Yeah,
That
I didn't even
wasn't the
think about that.
emergency.
That's kind of funny that contextually it would sound that way. Because I imagine like to anybody who doesn't know the situation would think that it's there's nothing else it could be. Just somebody like, no, I'm gonna make it. It's okay. I got COVID, but I'll get there. So to tie it back towards the book real quick here, you had this notebook. What comes first, the chicken or the egg, in the sense that like, did you know that the book was going to be a project before the words and the poems started coming to you, or did the poetry start and then there was a moment where you realized that it was starting to fit together into something?
Um, I guess it was the poetry instead of the book. Like I knew that I wanted to make another book, but like the title of it changed like 6 times.
Mm-hmm. If you can hear me, Lexi, it's
Um,
frozen up here.
yeah, we're glitching.
Yeah, that's not. Here we
The
are.
Matrix.
Okay, I didn't want you to get cut off and get like real deep into something. You're good now.
But yeah, it was oh man, I wish that I had the notebook. Like I should have gotten it out so that I could like showcase it and be like, this is the first draft.
See, if it was me,
But
oh sorry, I was gonna say that would have been such a fun promotional like gimmick to say like the first 50 people or whatever, however many pages are filled out, gets 1 page of the original notebook.
we could definitely do something like that. I'd be down. I'd be down for that.
That'd be interesting, but I want to desecrate the you know, your artifact there. Like I have original notebooks when I used to handwrite everything, and I wouldn't actually be able to do it. I'm too attached to them emotionally.
I can give them photocopies.
There we go.
I handwrite everything. Everything gets handwritten first before it gets typed up and sent out. Mainly because I suck at technology. But um,
Can I?
anyway, getting back to the original question.
Yes, that.
The poetry definitely came first before the book, and I had a general idea of what I wanted to do because the book that I published beforehand was kind of like touched on mental illness, but had an underlining like love story about a very toxic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I knew that I wanted the book after that to be more like longer, heavier, you know what I mean, into like the like really delving into the mental illness, the
Mm-hmm.
um toxicity. There is no like actual like solid love story in the book, even though it touches on relationships. Um Obviously because of my children. You know, there's poems in there for my daughter and stuff, and so and that's a huge part of the whole process too, is like going through this while also having like kids. So there's definitely love factors in there, but I definitely went into this wanting to delve more into like the abuse that I had gone through, the struggles with the mental illness, the on and off like meds, and what that did to me mentally, and like the internal fights and stuff. So
So I actually got two questions now lined up, but the first one, real quick, I have to ask because it relates to me on a personal level. Doing everything longhand, do you think there's creative benefits to that, or do you find a different experience writing things that way?
it's cathartic for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for me, it's easier, like visually, to see something start to actually come together as far as like a book, because like I did that first draft, you know, in a notebook, but then that became rewriting of certain poems on paper, editing, and then like play like being able to actually physically like place them in a lineup, and then being like, okay, no, that doesn't work, and like switching them around. So but I know like other people would rather just sit in front of a computer and like, you know what I mean, like type and like, because there's I have so many grammar and spelling errors on like all of my handwritten notes, because if
Yeah.
a writer, I'm super bad when it comes to grammar and spelling.
Well, sometimes it's like some words have one L there, some have two, and it gets confusing. Is there an S or a Z in advertising? No,
Yeah.
I've always found that if you can do longhand, I think it makes the art better. I can't anymore because of joint pain, but I used to only do it that way, and like I just like what you're describing. I just living through like seeing even like little details like the notebook, the page, the end of the pages, like when you see like not the spine but the other end where the pages are sticking out, and they're like a little bit grayer on the pages you've written through, and seeing you work down through it is just the absolute
Yeah.
most rewarding experience, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't relate with the joint pain. Aren't you? You're like 50 now, right? You just had a birthday.
Yeah, yeah, 57. No, I've always had it, and it was always a creative drive because usually I'm pretty wordy, so doing that got to a point with writing where I would write less because it was painful to write. So like it'd be like, is this word worth physical harm? So that's why my books took a straight dip in quality after I stopped doing that. Why is this so indulgent now? But back to your book. Um, Speaking of, and I wasn't even going to bring this up, but you had already kind of mentioned it. Being a parent, how do you feel about these books and like in your children's lives? Do they know that you write books? How much do they know? Would you ever let them attend a performance? At what age would you?
Um, well, my son is 6 months old, so he
So he's read the
doesn't.
book many times now.
Yeah, he's a huge fan. No, my daughter is 8, and she knows. She she saw my shirts and everything, and she was like, "Mom, you have merch. You're famous." And I was like,
That's
"Yes,
right.
yes, I am." um, no, she knows what I do. She's seen a couple performances of lighter stuff, but I
Hmm.
have not. Like, she doesn't really know the intensity of it.
Yeah.
Not something that like I plan on like just keeping hidden, you know what I mean, from my kids, but
Hmm.
there's definitely an age where like that stuff should ease in too. And I think once my daughter's like a preteen, I'll probably like let her actually like start like be like, if you want to read my book, you can. We can talk about this stuff, you know. Especially like being a young girl is scary.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like
I
I
know.
want her to be yeah. No, like I want her to be aware, you know what I mean, of
Yeah.
like the dangers out there, like the what people are capable of doing. And I mean like it's the same for guys too. I just worry more about my daughter because of how much older she is. Like with my son
Mhm.
being 6 months, I got a while before he's like opening the door and walking out into the world. So,
Yeah, and everybody has
um,
different struggles too. It's a different kind of worry, I would imagine.
yeah, but um, so it's definitely, and it kind of makes it weird because of my kids being younger. So there's not too much that they are exposed to. So it almost feels like I live two different lives.
Yeah.
Um, and with being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, that just like really lines up so well with everything. It's like,
Do you ever think that maybe you're misdiagnosed and it's just being a parent and having an adult life versus life at home?
um, I many times have thought that I've been misdiagnosed because I've delved into the whole like researching mental illness on your own and then like
Hmm.
spending like an hour goes by and you've read like all the different schizotypes and you're just like 6 cups of coffee in like, oh my God, I really am insane. And like,
Yeah,
oh,
I know my family's history with certain people, without getting into their personal information, and I know like what I've been diagnosed with versus the symptoms I have, and a part of me is just like maybe it's better I don't know.
sometimes I'm like, man, I wish that I would have just gone on life, living in like my
Yeah.
little fantasy world that I had set up. And then other times I'm like, nah, because you know what? It wasn't normal being 20 years old and still having imaginary friends. Like,
S-
but no, I'm definitely better off for have going through all of that. I wouldn't be able to be a good parent if I wouldn't have,
mhm.
you know what I mean, faced all of that stuff. And I think also continuing to face that stuff because there's a lot of trauma that comes um, with like the different types of abuse that I went through that I am still like dealing with. And I think publishing it and being an advocate is a way that's also helping me, deal with it and
Mhm.
get over it. It's benefiting me as a parent. And as my daughter starts to get older, I took her to her first garage punk show for for Halloween, so that was really exciting. So like I'm excited as she gets older to be able to share, you know what I mean, more of like this stuff with her, and like um and yeah, I think I don't think I would actually still be here either if I wasn't a parent.
Mm-hmm.
I think my kids played a huge role in helping me get over a lot of like these issues and my struggles with like suicide and everything. Like if it wouldn't have been for my daughter during a certain time period, I probably would not be alive right now. And I know that's a really heavy like statement to make, but um, it is what it is, I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a heavy statement, but it's a good statement. So,
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to say like everything happens for a reason, but it's one of those situations almost, it
yeah.
sounds like. But that all ties into the book pretty well actually, because a lot of the book to me, and I'm not as familiar with your past work. I've read a fair portion of it, but your last work, it seems like there was still an element of a kind of sugarcoating a lot of things, or not directly acknowledging or confronting these issues. That then this next album is like under the floorboards. You're seeing just like the raw emotion of it, the grimy reality. Um, and it's all about confronting these things to go through a cathartic experience to wind up better at the other end. You have to go through spleen. You got to get to the underworld in order to come out the hero of the story. So, how much would you say in the book? Because it doesn't, I don't remember any exact explicit references to your children. I could be mistaken or forgetful. But how much of a driving force in the narrative was that for you? Your own personal experiences, especially as a parent, as opposed to something that readers can grab a hold of and relate to.
Ooh. Well, there is um there is a poem called Nora, and
Mm-hmm.
that's my daughter's name. So that is definitely like like a straight up like poem about her. Um, Everything else I think in there. There's a poem called Xavier
Mm-hmm.
that is about um, an abortion that I had to have at one point, and that's something that like I still have trouble like kind of getting into, but like you said, like this book was definitely like getting like under, you know what I mean, like the floorboards, and like
Mm-hmm.
actually like really getting in to that stuff. Um it's really sad. I can't remember if, because I do have a poem called Cedric for my son,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that one actually made it into the book.
I
Now that I'm thinking about it.
I don't remember,
Yeah,
to be
I
honest.
should remember. It's my
Yeah,
book.
yeah, I've read it about 5 times, but like Xavier, I explicitly remember you performing it,
Yeah.
and Nora, I remember now that you had mentioned it.
Uh,
Cedric, I don't recall.
yeah, I don't think that one. I think that one might have actually been written right after the production started, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm trying to remember correctly with the timeline of everything. So he's not really mentioned much in the book. But yeah, Xavier was one of the poems that I read at the release
Mm-hmm.
for the book that I'm probably never gonna read again.
Was that specifically planned just for the release?
Yeah, I had a couple that was like specifically just for the release. But maybe a couple years down the road, I'll be in a different
Mm-hmm.
spot, like too, with that. But um, so those are definitely like the specific like kind of like parenting, you know what I mean, like stuff. Um, there's a there's a couple in there that are definitely more metaphoric, that reference like stuff that like I'm sure most people wouldn't really catch.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a couple of poems that are written um, almost like love poems or like heartbreak poems. That's more of like internal struggles. That has to do with also like trying to keep your composure with having a kid. So it's woven definitely throughout the book, the whole. being a parent.
Sorry, I was just thinking of a few different things. And thank you for actually answering that question. I phrased that very poorly. As I was rambling on, I was like, what am I even asking again? I'll try to tie it together. I made a word. We'll get through it. So thanks for running with that, because I kind of flubbed there.
I also run on and like I go on tangents, and like it's like half of my poems are tangents. Half of my poems end
Mhm.
up just being run-ons, and then like I go back later and I'm like, oh, I should probably break that up, like actually make that into sentences.
So that actually leads into a good question. What was the editing process like? So you originally hand wrote it, and eventually you did type it up. And I know that you had sent it to an editor before it even reached Longshot Books. But
Yeah.
for you on your end, creatively speaking, what was the editing like? We'll start poem by poem, but then as they each found their piece into the book as a whole, how do you arrange this kind of a narrative and overarching themes from front to back?
Um, well, what started with was like I had the order of the poems done before I started typing it up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the editing was I went through and edited it first, which usually doesn't go very well because I suck when it comes with that stuff,
Can I
but I
give
try.
advice?
And then that's when I started also trying to like do the more uh, creative aspects of it so that it wasn't just poem, 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 poem. And like I broke it up in the different parts. And that took a little bit of time because the three different sections started at different points, I think, every week for like a month straight. Like I had to play around with that. And then as I was typing it up and working on that was when I started like um, I would just send random poems to the artist, Rainer, who did the stuff um, for like throughout the book. And I would just like the way that him and I work is so funny. He actually did the cover for my previous book also, This Is Not For You. And uh, I give him like a general idea of what I want, and he'll just be like, all right, yeah. And then I won't hear from him for weeks. And then like I'll just like get something and it's like perfect. And so like I told him, I was like, look, like as I'm like working on editing, like figuring out like how I want to break this up, you know what I mean, and all that, I'm just gonna randomly send you a poem that as I'm doing this I go, oh, artwork with that one would actually be really good. And then send me whatever you feel from that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how that like worked. And we didn't even know how many like pieces were going to be in the book. I had no idea which poems until it happened. We're going to like have the artwork. So that was kind of fun actually, because it was like almost this like element of surprise while like I was fine tuning, you know, and finishing um, everything. And it worked out really well, I think, also. Like I feel like the pictures worked really well with the tone. And like it's just really cool to have like a friend who's like an artist like that that you can just go to and be like, here's this mood. Like here's
Yeah,
some
well,
words.
it's almost like I feel like everybody that I know has a mechanic that they go to where they're like, have it stop making this noise, turn this light off." It's kind of
Yeah.
the same thing.
That's a really good metaphor for it, actually.
Thank you.
I like that. Um, and then but I know so many different like artists too, because it's like I knew he was the right one for the book,
Hmm.
but he didn't do the stuff for the shirts.
Yeah.
Um, it was my boyfriend actually, you know, did the artwork for that, and because it's a very different kind of art, and
Hmm.
I think that's also too is just like, and this is just a general comment for everybody, like any type of artist, you know, whether you're a musician, you're in a band, you know what I mean? Like you do podcasts, like Todd who just like sits in his room all day, night and
Doing
writes.
nothing.
No, like be in touch with your community. You know what I mean? Like get to know
Mm-hmm.
the other like artists, musicians, poets, like whatever, everybody. Like get to know all of them, support them because you never know like what great connections you're going to make out there, what um so much understanding and like so many great friendships in my life have come just from the artist community in itself, and it's amazing. So I really really like just encourage anybody to, and I know what anxiety can be like. I know that there are people who are like creating like art on canvases in their bedroom and like nobody else sees them, or like you know what I mean, like plays guitar in their house but like doesn't step out. Like anxiety can definitely come into play with that a lot, but I guarantee if you like, even if you just put yourself out there with one person, you know what I mean, that you admire in your community, like it goes a long way. It really does.
One thing I've noticed generally with artists, and this is even how we wound up connecting, was typically, and it's a little bit different for me working like as a publisher or promoter, whatever you want to call whatever I do. I don't even know what I do yet. I don't know what my role is. Generally
I
antagonist.
exist.
Yeah, I'm just around every now and then. But typically, when you approach somebody and say, "Hey, I really like your work," yeah, there is that anxiety. Generally speaking, I've only had one issue ever where somebody was basically like, "Fuck off," in like the last 3 years or so. There's only been one. So
I
like,
that's really actually I um I have a bunch of poems, not so much in the Electra Complex. This is more like other stuff outside. I have a bunch of call out poems. um and I have a bunch of call out poems, and I have a lot of poems that I've written about specific people that I've met at like in certain points in my life. And for the most part, anyone who I've ever sent like their poem to, you
mhm,
know what I mean? Like I've got like good responses, even if they were like, I don't quite understand it, you know what I mean? But
yeah.
like one time, one time, and this was a girl, I'm not gonna like say her name or anything, but it was a girl I met in Pittsburgh
Oh
actually.
no,
Uh
it
my
was
first
Marine.
visit.
I'll say it.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, I wrote a love poem to Maureen, and she was just like, "Fuck you, Lexi." No, I was just kidding. Um, no, and I sent this like I was like I actually wrote a poem about like the first time I met, because like it was just like a really specific time period in my life, and like it just really sits with me. So she was like, yeah, yeah, I'd love to read it, and I sent it, and she was like, is this really how I'm viewed? This is like this is terrible. Like why would you don't ever read this? And I was like, oh. This is the first time I've ever gotten a response like that, but I think in one regard I kind of needed it, because sometimes you got
Hmm.
to get like taken down. Like sometimes you start to get a little bit of an ego, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? And like everything was going on with the Electra Complex and everything, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna send her this poem, and like
Yeah,
I got torn apart for it.
I can't I can't speak for that. I've never tried that, but that's really funny and interesting. I don't usually write things for other people. I try to keep people in my life out of my books completely. Um, but
I
there's a
imagine that's
line in one
actually
that
really
I've written where it said, you know how like Shakespeare used to write odes to women, or like people write love poems, like talk them up. You're better off complimenting women
yeah.
by never writing about them. Just don't even mention. That's kind of how I feel about my writing. It's like the just keep everybody a safe distance away. But of course, anytime there's a maternal character, I get that call from my mom. That's like, Todd, is this really how you feel?
Yeah, I totally get that. All of those statements actually, because I'm pansexual, so I definitely get the whole like, don't don't write a love poem to a girl if you're trying to ask her. Just don't even ask her out. Best to just kind of pine over her from a distance, and then if like
And
maybe your friend groups like mingle and you
mm-hmm.
start talking, then
Then just grab her by the hips.
but like
Assertiveness.
also you said something about like your mom calling you. Um, I remember the first time I performed the "This Is Not a Suicide Note" poem,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom was at the show. My mom's a huge supporter, and my mom cries at everything. But I remember her coming up to me like afterwards, and she was like, "But that's not real, right? Like you're okay. You don't need to go to the hospital or anything, do you?" And I was like, "Yes, mom, I'm okay."
You played it wrong. You should have said, "Mom, I'm doing all right mostly, but I just need some money. I just need like $50, and I don't know what's gonna happen if I don't get it." You had an opportunity.
That's the one thing. Like if I was like, "Mom, I just like I'm I'm in trouble deep right now. I got into a situation. I need some money." My mom would be like, "Well, you better figure that out."
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't work with every parent.
It's that tough love.
Uh, but dang, that really threw me off. I'm not gonna lie. I had some stuff lined up, and then so actually, yeah, I do remember now. What? So you said there were some that didn't make it into the collection. Do you ever intend to read those? Or are you saving onto those for maybe potential use or publication elsewhere?
Um, I mean, I have read them.
Hmm.
And I do intend to like, continue to read them. Uh, Shows that I mean, with what's going on, my tour basically got canceled.
Yeah.
I think half of them just got postponed. So when all
Hmm.
this blows over, I will still be able to perform. But I definitely, when I do stuff like this, try to not just do all the content from the book for a
Hmm.
couple of reasons. One, I don't feel like memorizing an entire book. Two, like you don't want to give it all away. Like you got to
Yeah.
save some for like because if you just do the majority of the book, then why are people going to buy it?
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know. It also keeps people interested in like following you, like further. Um, and I definitely I had posted something up because like with not being able to go on this tour, like selling stuff has definitely declined. So
Hmm.
I'm trying to kind of push more and like do more stuff like with the poetry video that we're gonna release. Um, and like I posted something about like, oh, if you buy my book, like I'll mail it to you with like a poem that didn't make it in.
Hmm.
Um, and that of course got no response, but
It's very difficult. It really
uh,
is.
I have played around with the thought though of doing a chapbook called like the B-sides or something like that.
Hmm.
And it's just going to be like a small collection of the poems that almost made it in to the Electra Complex. I keep teetering back and forth on that one.
Well, it's a tough
But
thing because typically the B sides are seen as lesser. But this is bad. You're gonna laugh. But the only example I have is Carly Rae Jepsen's album Emotion. She came out with an EP called Emotion Side B with tracks. She wrote like 100 tracks and only like 15 made on the album. So then she had like a whole album of bonus tracks, and everybody was like, "Wow, these are just as good as the album tracks." And you don't think of that immediately. Not as culturally refined as I am to think, oh no, this isn't like the shitty ones. This is like the Carly Rae Jepsen of outtakes.
maybe I should just call it that. The Carly Rae Jepsen outtake.
I think that's a wise decision. I think that's the best, and it's the best artistic choice with the most integrity.
The cover of it is going to be you dressed up as Carly Rae Jepsen.
Oh God, I don't know. That might make me too
The
happy.
only
I need to keep some items on my bucket list so that I can have something to look forward to in life. I can't knock it all out in my 20s.
um, but I know for a fact though that I do want to republish, re-edit, and put out a second edition of This Is Not For You.
Hmm.
And this is something that I've actually talked to you and Maureen about yet, but that is something that I would like to do through you guys, but
Are
like
you trying to put me on the
once
spot?
all I am, I'm putting you on.
That's something we could definitely talk
Um,
about. That's pretty exciting. Thank you for the offer for sure.
but there's just like there's some things with like because I self-published that one,
Mm-hmm.
so there's mistakes that were missed. There's things in it, you know what I mean, that I definitely want to change. So it would definitely be like a different like a second edition of
Mm-hmm.
it. But for the most part, I would want to keep like all of the poems are going to be the same. The title is going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
Cover would be the same. Um, and but I know like that has to be when like the Electra Complex calms down, when like
Mm-hmm.
you guys are just getting on your feet. And
I hate to
from what
say
I
it,
hear,
but the COVID shutdown has really, I mean, like we're so small that we're really just seen as two individuals, but it's still a small business and it's still affected by the basically the economic. Oops, knocked my headphones off my other monitor with that great hand motion. I just um anyhow, it's really affected a lot of our future plans where we're now looking at contracts that we were sending out and having to make like an additional lines of them saying like, this is all subject to liability with the current economic situation. Because, and I'm sure a lot of artists are affected by this too, but the company is also, Maureen are very fortunate in that we're still working full time, and I can't get into my job specifics. The company, that's just one wall that I put up there, but um, I could say I'm probably this month alone lost $1,000 of personal income. Um, so it sucks. There's a lot up in the air right now with that. Just like with your tour and anything else,
yeah,
it's just a really bad time, not just for businesses in general, but artists as well. And I think that art is going to come from this. I've seen some artists, like Halsey Hires, a really great one, and they put out a poem specifically mentioning this. But like that inspiration might come out of it. I think there's going to be an art movement that is born of it, even if it's a small one. But economically, the art scene's taken a pretty huge hit, and I've seen this across the board.
yeah.
It's scary.
Small locally owned businesses too are
Yeah.
taking a huge hit, which sucks. But in a way, and this is like kind of why I like, because I'm usually pretty against social media and
Hmm.
technology. I don't trust the government. Uh,
How dare you?
that's a different podcast.
Yeah. Well, the next one, you'll be wearing a tinfoil hat that says "strange" on it.
um, but it's really cool because I'm seeing like musicians and like artists and stuff start doing like, you know, like Facebook Live and like, you know what I mean? Like putting
Hmm.
all this stuff, like, they're still performing for people. They're still like putting on shows and everything. And I think that's like amazing because it just shows like, hey, like no matter what happens, like we're not going to stop doing this.
Yeah.
And that's like, that's just really, really cool to see. So if anything, the government should be scared of artists.
Is that a threat?
um, no, but it is. It's like I
Hmm.
think it's going to create a completely entirely like different kind of movement because like it
Yeah.
definitely has affected us in a negative way. But I see like this upcoming of positive stuff too. I mean, um, like I was able to do that poetry video that we're going to release,
Yeah.
which I think like that was a lot of fun. I may have gotten a little too drunk for it, but what else are you gonna do when you're quarantined?
Exactly. It's fine. I unfortunately have been so busy between the various long shot books projects, and I've actually been working on my own book again. Um,
No.
but thanks. I can't drink anymore. I've been sober for like probably 3 weeks now, if not longer, because I'm just too busy. Which I don't drink much anyhow. When I'm not sober, it's like maybe once a week, twice a week, where I get like almost tipsy. But still, there is like I don't get to indulge in that quarantine drunkardness, and that's really kind of upsetting.
I had like I think it well for me too, everything's been happening, like all of my art stuff. during this time period is happening really fast.
Hmm.
Um, hurts because like I had my daughter for like half a week, and like so I wasn't like, filming any videos or like doing, you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
doing anything like, and I'm getting my son tomorrow, and so it's like I had this like little time frame of like not a full week where I was like, all right, like
That
I'm
explains a
gonna begin
lot.
filming
I'm not gonna lie.
podcast. I'm gonna like, I'm gonna put all this stuff out there, and I'm gonna get drunk while doing it.
Just like get like a checklist of all like the adult stuff that you can't do with a child.
Yeah. And like we plan on doing a release of a live stream performance for me through Long Shots Facebook. We don't have an exact date for that yet, but I mean, like that's something that I can definitely do, like while I have the kids. So, like, I'm not gonna be doing that, like, with a bottle of wine, just like
Yeah,
downing that
a bottle of milk.
Bukowski style. Get my orange juice.
Instead of a screwdriver with vodka, it's just water. But
I need more water.
you
I'm
know,
really
you
bad at
raise a
that.
really great point in the macrocosm of just this project alone. I think it's oddly enough, you mentioned the Me Too movement, but then even the tour is reflective of the times we live in with getting postponed. And it's really, even though it's, I mean, it's disappointing. And it's just circumstance. I mean, it's better that everybody's safe because even if everybody goes to the show and there's maybe one person with symptoms and one other person gets it, if they even risk infecting somebody and putting someone else's health at risk, it's just not really worth it, unfortunately, as important as art is, But what's so important that you brought up is that it's not canceled, it's postponed. And that's really
Right.
the attitude I think our generation especially of artists is adapting to, is saying like, yeah, we're trapped in our house, we can't go to these shows, we can't sell things, we can't promote our books, but we're not giving up. We're going to keep doing what we're doing, and then we're going to come back once this is all over twice as strong.
Yeah. I think that's just not even just artists in general. I think that's what our generation has created in our communities, is
Hmm.
this extreme, like, you're not going to knock us down. Like, we're pretty resilient. We're pretty ready for the apocalypse.
Yeah, we're very determined to be the center of attention, whether it's on video, on a
Yeah,
stage. We need that fix, and we're not.
that's why we keep doing these live performances on Facebook and like constantly putting. If we don't have that attention on us, like when we start dying, our souls start slowly leaving us.
Yeah, but sorry, I had to do that. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately with your book, with the tour and everything going on, is how different the experience is in a very interesting way that I don't know that I've recognized with other performances quite the same. Is that when I read the Electra Complex, I feel like it's like Alice in Wonderland, like you're entering another world, through the lens of your
Oh,
perspective. And I
that
think
makes
it's a
that makes
very specific atmosphere. I think that there's so much that like you're just observing through the book as though you're walking around like an art exhibit essentially. Whereas at your performances, it's almost the exact opposite, where it's like you're a ambassador of this world coming out and speaking to a foreign land. You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, I definitely, as far as like other poets that I know, like personally, like locally, not
Yeah.
big time button like poets. Um, it's definitely something that has separated me from most of them, and I'm not saying this like in a bad way or anything, but like when I plan like tours, like and stuff, and I push to the like perform at like punk venues, you know what I mean, and like bars and stuff is because like I may not be a musician, but one of the things that I fight for and am an advocate for also is that like all genres should be able to perform at the same places, should be able
Hmm.
to perform together. Um, and so I think that's where the difference kind of comes in with that. Because I definitely look at it as like, even though I don't have a band behind me, you know what I mean? Like, even though like I'm not playing an instrument, um, I'm putting on a show. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like and I am not there are so many poets that I've seen live that like I'm friends with that, you know, read from their phones, read from their papers. Their content is amazing. You know what I mean? I love watching them. I just come at it from a different angle, and like
Hmm.
maybe it's also just majority of my friends are musicians and like bands and stuff. But I definitely think like if I'm going to keep people like captivated, if I'm gonna push, you know what I mean, for poetry to be this up and coming thing along with like the mental illness stuff that I'm an advocate for. Like I also want to push like the poetry movement. Um and I think that's a very important way to like go about it then is to just come out and just like actually put on a performance. Um like throw papers around if I am reading from them. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
I can go from like sitting on a chair to standing up. Like I'll stand in front of the mic and then I'll take the mic. Like sometimes I've gotten into people's like faces. You know what I mean? Like um not like, you know, physical altercations, but but like it's it's a way to like keep them captivated, and it's a way to get myself credibility to continue going into places that normally book musical acts,
Hmm.
and then hopefully opens the door for other people to be able to perform at different venues, and you know, widen where they can actually perform as like poets or storytellers even, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like it doesn't just have to be poets. Like I'm it's something that I've been pushing for a while now. And I know locally in my hometown, I've definitely have kind of like pushed that barrier a bit. I definitely have been able to, which is probably why like I always am able to like have like somebody tag along for like a closer show, and we'll do like a half poetry, half acoustic set for me. And I'm very grateful, you know, for being able to have that. But I'm not changing much if all I changed was the small town of York, PA. Like
It's a start.
it is, yeah, it's a start. But
Well,
I
yeah,
also have a poem in my book about how much I hate this town. So
yeah. Well, that's why you got to change it. No, I'm glad you brought all that up because I remember the planning for the release show. These were all things Maureen and I had discussed at length in terms of like the venue. And we had spoken with various venues at that point in time. But ultimately, what was funny is the one that we wound up going with was our first choice. It just took months and months to actually coordinate it due to so much going on with that particular venue, which I don't even know if it's still open, unfortunately. I know that they had to change location, so this was one of the last shows, to my understanding, at Howler's on Liberty Avenue, which is cool and sad, yeah. But the thing is, I don't know. I'm sure they have done this, but I don't know of any like acts where it was reading from poetry or a book or anything like that. As far as I'm aware, they were always strictly musical acts. So it was really cool to be able to book that, and we had tried to do so specifically because you had that energy and you would benefit from that stage. And in terms of the supporting acts, you know, we did see it almost like a musical band lineup where it's like you don't want just like three hardcore bands in a row. You know, I always think of this one
right,
lineup, which most people would not want to go to this show. This is like the 80s, I believe, when most of these bands had pretty much had sold out. But it was like Hall & Oates, The Clash, The Smiths, and David Bowie. And I always think about that kind of dynamic where like they have to be kind of loosely related. There has to be like a thorough line between them, but they have to be different enough that you're
right,
not just hearing like 57 2 minute fast tempo songs in a row with different people singing them.
Right. No, that definitely makes sense. And I think that's another reason why I push to book a lot of shows where it's a mixture of poetry and music.
Hmm.
Um, but I've also run into the problem of when the poet comes up is when the people walk away to go to the
Yeah,
bathroom and like get another drink, and I mean like it's definitely a struggle, it's a battle. Um, but it like that definitely makes sense. And I remember talking to you guys when we were planning this, and I was asking like, how long do you want my set to be? And you know what I mean? And you were like, well, how long were you thinking? And I'm like, oh, I can definitely do an hour long, you know, like
yeah,
performance. And you were like, wow, that's amazing. And I'm like, well, I mean, like, that's like what I prepared for. And I mean, like, obviously, I've also done 15-minute long, you
hmm,
know what I mean? Sets. But when you're trying to push yourself into like these different kind of venues, you know what I mean? And you're
hmm,
trying to kind of, um, you're having this contest almost, this fight against like these bands and stuff. Like, you have to be able to have like 40 minutes worth of like content that you're
yeah.
confident enough that you can get up and perform. So,
Well, that was another thing that like typically, and this might sound bad to say, but typically like if an artist had told us, yeah, I'll go for an hour, we probably would have a lot of hesitance. We probably say, why don't we start at 20 minutes? But we had seen you perform, we knew about your history, so like, yeah, let's go for it. That should work. Like there's a little bit more
and
confidence
then
there
I got up
because
on stage, and halfway through, you guys were like, "Oh, this was a mistake."
you hear like an alarm going off. You see one of us like, oh.
You like stopped filming at one point. Like, we're just sitting there, like, "Oh my God, why did we do this?"
Speaking of blackouts, that was I've talked about this before, but like any time that I perform, I black out basically. Like I just I think what happens is I have anxiety attacks and panic attacks. I know what those are like. It's not that. It's just that like I'm so acutely aware of everything that I just then become completely numb, and then everything's just kind of hazy. And then immediately after the performance, I'll usually go a few hours, just not long enough to get home. I'll sleep like 16 hours, 20 hours. And that
Ah,
show
I totally get
was probably, for me, more stressful than any performance I had had to give in public. Just there was so much coordination and so much going on. I was so much more nervous and off tempo, and filming and all that stuff. Just trying to make that perfect. Marie and I had talked about like, oh my god, that was stressful for us. Like it was fun, it was exciting, but there was
that.
so
Right.
much pressure, and it turned out really well. It was worth the stress, but
I like the rest of that like night, I just kept walking around going like, "Oh my God, that was horrible." And I was like, and that's like that's gonna be half of the documentary. It's like this horrible set, and everybody was like, "No, like it really wasn't." And I think that's also just part of being like an artist in general is like you're your
yeah,
biggest critic, you know. And it was like there was so much around that performance, like you were saying, like it was
hmm,
exciting, but it was also stressful. And I was like, this is the release. This is going to be filmed for the documentary, like you know what I mean. So I was like, this
yeah,
has got to like, um. So there was a lot writing on it, and like, um, how you said like it really tires you out. Like I know for us, it was like, and I touched this on the like video diary vlog stuff
yeah,
that's going to be coming. I touch on this a little bit too, but like we drove the night before the day of the show to Pittsburgh in a snowstorm. Like we didn't even get into town until like what was it? I think it was like 1 in the morning. I picked up a book from you,
yeah, yeah. That was it.
and and um and then like we slept for like maybe like 6 hours. We tried to sleep in a little bit so that I
Hmm.
wasn't completely dead. And but we also wanted to enjoy the day like in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
Pittsburgh's like 4 hours away from here, I think. About, yeah. Um, so it's not like somewhere that we get to visit like often.
Yeah.
Um, so like we got to go downtown a little bit and kind of experience that, and then it was like, okay, come back, like, you know what I mean? Like get ready, get in
Hmm.
performance mode, you know, like get there, get everything set up. Um, and then I think we went out with like my friends that I was staying with um, that weekend afterwards to kind of like celebrate. We went to Rock Room actually,
I'm
and
not even
there is
familiar
a
with Rock
poem.
Room, and I live
Really?
here.
It is a scuzzy punk dive bar, which is like that's my favorite.
That's
So, but
fascinating.
there's a poem in the Electra Complex actually called Rock Room. That is, I wrote that.
That's
I
really
wrote that
funny.
poem. I wrote that poem while laying on the floor of Rock Room with sunglasses on. In my notebook, I was just like laying on the floor, like while all these, it was somebody's birthday and they were listening to Thin Lizzy and like dancing around. And I was just like this weird poet with sunglasses on in the bar, like writing a poem on the floor. Um, but so we went out and celebrated a little bit. And then it was like, okay, go back, go to sleep, get up, and like leave. To like go back
Yeah.
home and drive like 4 hours again. So like it was a very stressful trip. It was exciting, you know, like you said, but like it was a lot of driving. It was exhausting.
Yeah.
We really didn't have much money. Like, I mean, like that's another thing too with like being a parent. Stuff like this always ends up being on a tight budget for me.
Yeah.
So like we had like just enough to pay for like the gas. We packed food. Like we were eating like packed like sandwiches. Was it the day of the show we woke up and we were like eating our packed sandwiches from like the night before for like breakfast. Like so we're like we don't have that much money.
That
Um
was kind of like Marine and I took a trip up to Philly this past summer. We visited a friend there. He's actually he's a performer as well. He does music and poetry and acting. But he was actually one of the two people that. So originally, Long Shot Books was supposed to be four people. We had hoped, but it wound up being Marine and I, which is totally cool. They've just got other lives and are doing other things in other parts of the state. But it was like it was almost identical. It's like a 4 hour drive, and we had like all of our meals packed and everything. Like we wound up doing like a little bit, but I remember that. So we stayed the first night. The second night, we met up with his friend, and the second night he was like, "So what bars do you guys go to? What'd you do last night?" And we're like, "Uh, we I think we packed
we
some.
ate some grapes that we brought with us
We
and
packed rum and coke. Is what we did. I remember now.
see that's not a bad idea. Man, why didn't we think of that? We should
Yeah,
have packed oh no, I think we did. We brought I think we brought Keystone Light.
there you go. The thing is though, is that like I would imagine I haven't done this, but I would imagine that it would be so cathartic to go to the bar after a release show. I feel like there is
Oh yeah,
something
it was.
necessary in that.
And it's really because another thing that I touch on in the vlog thing is and this might just be people with mental illness, I don't know. But um like after a performance for me, like I hit a mania like peak. And
Hmm.
like so like I can't like step off that stage or like you know what I mean, like leave the venue and immediately just be like, okay, you know, and like
Yeah,
back to reality. So doing something like that is like I need that release almost. And what helped that night was there was actually a band playing. So I got to kind of like continue that, like, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Momentum and like that. I think I moshed actually a bit that night.
yeah. That
So
that helps. I remember.
moshing helps. Moshing always helps.
I'll keep this short because it's off topic. But I remember the first show that I did in about probably 5 years was also the first time that I was hungover. It was like 2 weeks before my book Young Adult was released, and I drank before the night before. I didn't intend to, but I was really nervous about the show, so I overdrank, and I was really depressed because it was
I've
about a
been
month
there.
after David Bowie died, and I went and saw the movie The Man Who Fell to Earth, which he starred in.
Oh no, that
And
was a mistake.
so like that combination of like David Bowie grief, and the piece that I was performing the next day was about David Bowie. It's an allegory where it's a character's grandfather had passed away, but the grandfather's clearly a reference for like artistic inspirations that are like generations removed from us and dead now. And so like those two things just was like a whirlwind of drinking, and so I peaked like more than I ever peaked in my life at the day of that performance. Like I could not go
Ooh.
like 3 minutes without running to the bathroom at I forget the name of that venue now. It damn it, that's gonna drive me crazy. Anyhow, so like I kept on saying like just make it through the performance, just make it through the performance, and somehow I made it through that whole like 13-15 minute performance without puking, and that's probably only 13 to 15 minutes I went without puking that whole day.
It's impressive.
So
It's amazing what willpower can do.
same with the first Long Shot Books reading event that we ever did. Marie and I went on party the night before because she had to leave the state after the show, like immediately after. So we partied the night before, really, really hard. And so we were both really hungover the next day. So the moral is to always go to the bar after your show. You did the right
I agree.
thing.
I agree with that. Actually, that statement. You never want to perform hungover. It's the worst. It's the
Yeah.
absolute worst. We've steered so off topic.
But we pulled it together.
I don't know how long you want this to be. We talked about it being an hour. It's definitely
I think it's about an hour,
an hour
20
and a half.
minutes. Oh, there we go. So one last question I will say, and this will tie it together, between the performance and the book and everything else, and just where we're heading at through the conversation. So you said there's a mania after finishing a performance. How did you feel immediately after you finished the book, as opposed to how do you feel now, months removed from it being real? Holy shit! It's only been 1 month since it was released.
Yeah.
Man, things went down the drain, didn't they?
There's definitely like the first time you hold the book, you know, when I
Yeah.
got that from 1 in the morning, extremely tired for driving in the snows. Like that gives you just like this feeling, you know, and like
Yeah.
I was so exhausted that night that I don't think I looked at it, but like in the morning when we got up and I was just like flipping through it, I was like I kept looking at my boyfriend. I was like, babe, like you know, it's like I did this, I made this, like.
And he snores.
It does take him a while to wake up in the morning. No, and it was really exciting. And then I like for the first week it was definitely like me just like continuously like looking through it, you know what I mean, and being amazed at like seeing everything come together. Getting feedback from like my close friends, you know, who like as soon as I got back were like, yeah, like I'm gonna buy a copy and everything.
Mm-hmm.
That was really cool. And it's not even that like I'm less excited about it now, but I think part of it has to do with like the tour being postponed, because the other side of the excitement, like once you get over the actually like holding it, you know what I mean, and like reading it, you know, and everything, the other part of it, the other excitement is the, you know, going around and promoting it, you know, getting to perform like those words and getting to actually like tell the story out loud then. And I'm not getting that because of the postponement. And I think that's why I'm trying to find other ways to kind of like, because I want to keep that drive going.
Yeah.
I don't want this to fall, you know what I mean, into the background. I don't want, it's almost like when everything started getting canceled and postponed, it almost was this like daunting feeling of like failure. And it almost made me want to just be like, well, this was a terrible idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like feel like this is going nowhere, obviously. I felt very defeated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it really is, like it did kind of halt a little bit of that excitement, that mania. But I think doing stuff like this, you know what I mean, and like doing the live stream and like the little vlogs of like the different stuff going on, um, is helping keep that alive. Uh, and just kind of holding on to the fact that once all this blows over, like I will be able, you know what I mean, to then get back out there.
Yeah, and in a way, I think and you're adapting very well. I think it's all going over exceedingly well. But you're going to be a stronger artist at the end of it because you've had that moment where it's like you reach the crucial where it's like, oh my God, everything's falling apart. And then you still pulled it together and became a
That's
more
also
dynamic artist and performer because of it.
that's also a benefit of having a mental illness is because every other day I feel like everything's falling apart.
True.
So
I've been watching a lot of interviews with people who own tattoo parlors and all that because the book I'm researching to write half of it takes place in a tattoo shop. And it's really interesting just when they just describe like being business owners and approaching customers and all that stuff, like the Forbes kind of stuff with it. And the big thing that really stuck with me was they said you shouldn't have plan B. You shouldn't have like a fallback where it's like, well, if this doesn't work out, I'll just go get a job at Walmart. It should be like you should have a plan B, but not an alternate path or whatever, like an escape route. So like, let's say that you lose all your customers, you gotta have a plan B, then a plan B for that plan B, and just like continuous backup upon backup, so that when crap hits the fan, you're not like, oh, this is all over. You're like, okay, time for the next step, time for this step after the next. Like there's always a fail safe. That way you're never like at the very end of the rope. And I thought that's really smart, and I wish that I did that.
that is really smart, and I think that's a really cool way to look at it. For the record, none of this was a backup plan that I had in mind. I'm just kind of making this up as I go. But I definitely need to start thinking more, I think, on different stuff that I can do, and plan it out a bit better instead of like just filming videos in the laundry room of my boyfriend's apartment. Well,
see,
you know, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was gonna let you speak. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there. I was gonna say that what I really do appreciate about all this though is that I always love looking at it like, and this is the egomania kicking in, speaking of mental illness, but I love looking at these projects like if there's like a Wikipedia page that you would be able to have all this information for. It wouldn't just be a book. It's like an era. So like recently I went through Pink Floyd's discography and I knew nothing about them before. But I could see each CD, like what was happening in the band, different live performances, who recorded it where. And like with this, what's exciting for the Electra Complex because of this podcast, because of the performance videos, because of the promotional documentary, there's going to be a lot of material for people to draw from. So like, let's say you meet somebody in 10 years and you're discussing this. You know, hopefully all these sites are still up and the content's still there, of course, but accounting for that, you can say, yeah, so here's what I was doing and here's a wealth of material. It's not just like a memory. It's actually something tangible. Right. It's like what do you call that? Like a photo album almost.
A Wikipedia photo album.
Yeah.
People even use photo albums anymore?
Old people.
I want to have photo albums for when, you know, the government collapses and all the technology goes down and the apocalypse.
I've just been printing out Facebook pages. And so like I'll have a timeline instead of reading the paper in the morning. I'll just have like 50 staple pages of the timeline and I'll just scroll through it and I'll handwrite a comment or I'll circle the like button. So
ending, I guess, this podcast to kind of try and wrap it up because I feel like you and I could just talk like
yeah.
You guys do you and Maureen do the long car ride talks.
Yeah. We try
And
to.
and I would love to, once like this whole quarantine thing is over, is like make a trip out to join you on one of those, and
Yeah.
like we can start out like talking about long shot and like my release and like all like the stuff that happened, and then we can just turn it into crazy conspiracy theories.
It's a plan. We'll
And
make it.
I will get a tinfoil hat.
I think if we could make this happen, I think we could all have a craft day before, and we'll all make tinfoil hats for the
Yes.
video. I think that would be. Oh shit, my laptop's actually dying. So,
And that's the end, folks.
just 1 second. All right, I saved it. So, yeah, and we've talked about wanting to come up with you guys' issues. We both had a ton of car problems, like mine, particularly. Marine's is much better than mine, but mine, like, I refuse to drive within 100 miles of my house because I have a AAA, and like it's broken down the highway before. So after that experience, I'm like not risking that. But seeing that, like, once this is done, hopefully our jobs will go back to normal. We're both moving this year. Once everything cools down, which will be unfortunately at least fall, we definitely love to make a trip up and do it. We talked about going to you for like the final show of the tour, up close to
Yeah.
where you live, and returning the favor of you traveling so far to come to the release show.
And then I can drive you guys around York.
Yeah, exactly. And we can't do that in Pittsburgh because we know nothing about the place we live.
That sounds awesome. And then
Um,
people, there we go. We can end the
yeah,
podcast with giving people something to look forward to.
yeah. All right, I'm gonna hit the end recording now.